How would you like to improve your health and keep your family safe? You're listening to the Healthy Home Hacks Podcast, where we firmly believe enjoying optimal health shouldn't be a luxury. Healthy Home Authorities and husband and wife team Ron and Lisa will help you create a home environment that will level up your health. It's time to hear from the experts. Listen in on honest conversations and gain the best tips and advice. If you're ready to dive in and improve your well-being and increase your energy, you're in the right place. All right, here are your hosts, biobiologists, authors, media darlings, vicarious vegans, and avocado aficionados, Ron and Lisa Barris.
Hey there, food lovers and industry watchers. Welcome back to Clean Label Chronicles. I'm Ron, and something big is happening in the food world that's going to change what's on your grocery store shelves forever.
And I'm Lisa. When giants like Kraft Heinz, General Mills, and now Nestlé all announced they're ditching artificial dyes, this isn't just a trend. It's a seismic shift that's about to ripple through every aisle of your supermarket.
Exactly. We're talking about a complete overhaul of how products are formulated, labeled, and manufactured. The domino effect is going to be massive.
Which is why we brought in the director of product, label, and ingredient reviews for Registrar Corp, a regulatory compliance powerhouse working with clients in over 190 countries. She's got the inside scoop on what this means from manufacturing and boardrooms to your plate and your health.
We're diving deep into how this shift will impact everything from your morning cereal to your skincare routine to your pet's food. Plus, she'll reveal what food companies are scrambling to figure out behind closed doors right now.
So whether you're a conscious consumer, a business owner trying to navigate these changes, or just someone who is passionate about keeping your family healthy, you are in the right place and you are in for a treat.
Yes, don't go anywhere. This is about to get real interesting.
Our guest today, Anna Benevente, holds a BS degree in biology. She has been assisting companies with U.S. FDA regulations since 2009.
Anna has researched thousands of products to determine whether they meet FDA requirements for compliance. Her areas of expertise include product formulation requirements and labeling for cosmetics, over-the-counter drugs, beverages, food, dietary supplements, animal feed, and medical devices. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Anna, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join you all. I love that you use the term seismic shift because when the news came
We do
out,
live in California, so that's
right.
in our vocabulary.
I mean, it was like my jaw dropped when I heard the announcement. I mean, it really did send a shockwave through the entire industry, that something this monumental was occurring. And, we're starting to see more and more buildup, as the months have gone on. And I'm just super excited to be chatting with you all about this today and what it means for consumers, but also for industry as well.
Yes, thank you for that. It's such exciting news. We are really thrilled about it. And I have been watching the hearings at the Food Babe. I'm sure you're familiar with her. Are you familiar with the Food Babe?
Oh, I'm afraid I'm not. But
Oh, you're not? Oh, my
no.
gosh. She's been spearheading a lot of these changes for quite some time. Obviously, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being integral part of all of this. So I do want to get started. And, we're so happy you're with us today. So what are the key labeling changes companies like Nestle and Kraft Heinz need to make when removing artificial dyes from their products?
So, one of the first thing that popped into my head, when they said Kraft Heinz was doing this, I thought, oh my gosh, they must have thousands of products. And so
Right.
when you have even a small percentage that have, synthetic dyes in them, you're still talking about hundreds of products that they will have to reformulate, which is another monster in and of itself, right? But from the labeling standpoint, you're talking about hundreds of labels that will have to be updated and to reflect the new ingredients that are in the product, because of course that is a requirement for the labeling on any food product. And then they're going to have to figure out their logistics to make sure that as those changes occur on the factory floor, that those labels are there at exactly the right time and, get on exactly the right product. So when you're talking about these complicated supply and distribution chains for a company that size,
Yeah.
then, they're going to have all their ducks in a row, because if they company mislabel something, then that opens them up to FDA enforcement action. They can, issue a nasty warning letter to you that's public.
Do they get fined? Are there fines involved for that?
Not usually. It's usually kind of public shaming. Like, I live in Williamsburg, like Colonial Williamsburg, like the stocks, like
right.
the public shaming going on, for these companies.
Right.
It does a lot of reputational damage. And
Yeah,
they
right.
can force a recall, in certain cases, if they think there's a public health risk or something. So, companies have to get it right, and they have to make sure that, their internal communications are such that everything happens at exactly the right time.
Yeah. And when is that time? What is the enforced date that they have to comply by?
So, the interesting part of this, and the part that makes it so, kind of earth shattering to us regulatory folk, is that the only true ban is with the red dye number 3, that was banned last year under the Biden administration. And then there's talk from the current administration about banning 2 other ones, citrus red number 2 and orange B, that are actually not used that often.
Yeah, I haven't even heard of those. That's interesting.
One's used in sausage casings, and the other one is used to color orange skin, and that's it.
Okay.
So, the other reason why this is just so unbelievably monumental is that this is voluntary. They are asking. They are not moving the approval. They're asking, because you got to understand, like, rulemaking takes forever.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Years long.
And they'll pass it, and then they'll be like, in 5 years from now, they're required, right? So
even to pass it, they have to propose it and then wait for public comment and then issue the final rule. So it's a long, drawn out process. That's why we were all so shocked, wow, this is amazing, because they're asking for, voluntary phase of these. So they'll still be on the books, but it sounds like all of these major companies are just willfully and willingly going to go ahead and remove them, which I think, especially for people who are concerned about the synthetic colors, is really kind of heartening,
Yeah, that's great. Kind of like the PFAS and the nonstick cookware. That was a voluntary removal, right? And I don't know if anyone's even...
And do you know offhand, like for the manufacturers, do they typically purchase a quarter's worth, let's say, of labels ahead of time, and they have to get through the old product before they issue the new product?
I was wondering that too.
How long is it? Did you know offhand? Is it a year's worth of product they buy up front? I mean, as far as product, I mean the labels and the bottling, everything they're trying to change.
Yeah, they do. You're 100% on point there, because they do tend to buy to save costs. They'll buy their labeling in bulk, maybe a quarter's worth, maybe, half a year's worth, depending on how quickly their manufacturing runs are or how much money they have on hand. Smaller companies may have to buy in smaller amounts. The Crafts of the world probably, buy like a year's worth at a time. So, all of that has to be factored in as well.
So they'll likely use all that up, do you think? They'll go through the products that already have the labels ready for and all of that. And the products that are already produced, do you think they'll use all those up before they change?
That's hard to know. They haven't stated how far along the reformulation process they are. So reformulation itself is very, very tricky, because it's not just a simple swap of ingredients. So for something like blue, which is actually a very difficult color to impart on a food product, that's why the FD&C blue everywhere.
Right.
And if you're trying to replace it with something natural like spirulina extract, they've got different chemical makeup. They'll interact with those ingredients in a different way. So you may have to then reformulate the rest of your recipe, or you have to worry about whether the color is as vibrant or the stability of it. Natural colors tend to break down over time more quickly than those synthetic ones that have been cooked up in a lab. So all of that kind of comes into play. So depending on how far along they are with the reformulation process, they may have, be able to get through all that labeling stockpile before they actually have the manufacturing, producing the proper reformulation. Yeah.
Isn't it true that a lot of these companies already have different formulations for the European marketplace or the Canadian marketplace? I mean, wouldn't that be kind of an easy lift for them just to copy what they were doing?
It might not be the colors, right? It might be something separate.
It can be. So, and actually, that was one of the things that also occurred to me, that the multinationals, the Crafts of the world, will have an easier time than the smaller companies that have maybe been overly reliant on the synthetics, and will have to start the reformulation process from scratch. The one thing, though, to know is that for all color additives, even the natural ones, have to be approved for use by FDA.
Right.
Even fruit juice has a regulation saying that it's approved for, foods as a color additive. So there are lots of natural ones that don't have approval that are used in the
Oh.
EU and Canada.
Oh.
So like curcumin is one and safflower extract is another one. So it won't be the case that automatically their EU formulation can just be shifted over to the US, but you are 100% right that they will have an easier time because they've already been, using these natural dyes in other markets, either because they've been restricted in those markets or just those consumers have a greater desire for the natural colors than the US consumers traditionally have.
Mm.
Okay.
I think most people would want the natural if they had the option. I mean, I think people weren't given the option in a lot of the mainstream food brands that we think about, right?
Yeah, there's a lot more consumer interest in our foods now, I think.
Oh,
So
yeah.
General Mills 10 years ago tried to do this, and after 2 years, they had to revert back to the synthetics. The colors weren't as bright. Americans are like, I want my Fruit Loops to look neon, and so
Okay.
they didn't accept it.
Right.
And so
Expectations have to change, right? I like to
yeah,
put up the blue. Spirulina, we used to go to a place, Nectar Juice Bar. They had a spirulina vegan ice cream, and it was the most gorgeous blue. It's like really bright turquoise. And I'm like, that's from spirulina? And like the
Right.
brand Unreal Candy, that's what we hand out at Halloween. It's no artificial flavors, colorings, any of it. They have really beautiful bright pinks. I don't know what they use, but really bright colors for their M&Ms and their M&M version. They have their own version.
Healthy version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
familiar with that brand, Anna?
I am. Yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
live
Yeah. Yeah.
in Virginia, but yeah,
Okay.
whenever we do our ingredient research,
Yeah.
we come across the colors that are being used that are natural
Yeah.
from like our clients in the EU and in Canada. So you see a lot of, the natural colors that can convey that color vibrancy
Yeah.
that,
From
unfortunately,
vegetables and
is
yeah. I
used
mean,
to
when you think,
attract consumers.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So, guys, listeners demand healthy stuff, and don't worry if they're neon colored. Just
Right. Right.
at the end of the day, you want to be healthy.
So Anna, you give an example. You said the blue artificial dye and how that can affect the ingredient review process. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about that and some of the challenges of removing these artificial dyes that we should be aware of?
Well, from the business standpoint, we kind of touched on the consumer acceptance part, and consumers say they want natural and then they go and they buy the neon colored cereal. So the companies have to think about their bottom line, certainly. So certainly, what you just said, Lisa, was just spot on. Consumer demand drives everything. And so if it helps the bottom line for them to have the natural colors, then people should have that on their mental radar. I'm going to look for the products that have the natural colors. From the business standpoint, the other challenge that they face for things like the natural dyes is that, with their supply chains, they have to think about different aspects of sourcing those. It's easy to cook up blue one in a lab
Right.
to sourcing something from like the newest one, Gardenia Blue, that was just approved this week, I think. Got to get a bunch of gardenias to
Oh.
generate the amount of dye that the food industry uses. So, and they tend to be a little more costly to produce. So, there are all these things that
I was going to say that will
manufacturers
we see price increases in a lot of these products? Would you think?
we may. I mean,
Mhm.
thankfully, it doesn't take a lot of dye to color a product
Yeah.
necessarily, if they're intense enough. So, fingers crossed, we won't see like huge spikes, in
Right.
the cost of the food or anything like that, but manufacturers are going to have to factor that in,
Right. Right.
part of their calculations for sure.
And I'm sure they'll be shouting that from the rooftop on their new labels, I would think, right?
I would think so.
Yeah.
So
They're
I
going to want you to
absolutely would
know.
expect industry to take advantage of the marketing that comes with
Right.
having it, in big bold letters on the front, color source from natural
Mhm.
plants or something like that to attract the attention of consumers. Because you're right. As you just said, if I see them side by side on the grocery shelf, I'm going to go with the one that has the natural colors
Yeah.
because what I've
Okay.
heard about the synthetics and, studies suggest that they may have adverse effects on children. I may automatically steer to that one. So
Right. Right. But hey, we're talking about behavioral disorders, right? Is that the biggie when you're talking about the effects on children?
some of the studies that are out there suggest, I'm not a clinical researcher, so I can't speak to it, the validity. There's studies out there that suggest that it could affect a subset of kids, especially those that are prone to ADHD or something like that. The FDA their basic, statement on this is that these were approved after, rigorous scientific review. They're not used at very high levels. They're safe for addition to food. But I think, especially those that have concerns, if we have kids and we have concerns,
We have
then
very high rates of ADHD and all kinds of behavioral disorders now. I mean, it's skyrocketed,
Right.
I did look at the label of my frosted mini wheats this morning.
Yeah.
Were and they were natural.
What does it have in there?
They
Do
were
they put
natural.
artificial colors in there?
It was, I think, fruit juice color and maybe turmeric, which is strange because it was strawberry frosted mini wheats.
Okay.
Oh,
I
so they've
can't
already.
think colors, but they were natural. And
Oh, okay, that's
the way that they're
interesting.
declared in the ingredients list,
Yeah.
Wow.
if it's an FD&C color, by law, by the regulation, it has to say either FD&C red 40 or red 40. You can't hide it by just saying, oh, color added. You
Right.
can do that for some of the other colors that are in
Oh, okay.
regulation, but for those synthetics that are being targeted, by law, they have to be named.
They
So
do. Okay, that's
you're-
interesting. I didn't
can
know that.
know that they
Yeah.
can look at the ingredients list and be able to pick them out pretty quick, if they're concerned about that and want to try and avoid them.
Oh, just to recap what you said earlier, is it just 3 colors? It's the red and then the orange you had mentioned. Is that it? Or is it
No,
all
so
artificial
those
colors?
are the banned ones,
Those
the
are the
ones
bans.
that they will be removed from regulation. The approval is revoked. You absolutely cannot use this in food. So all of the others, the red 40, those are under that voluntary
Oh, okay.
phase out.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay, I
so
don't think a lot
FDA
of people were clear on that. I wasn't.
Right.
And what are
Yeah.
the 3 again? Can you remind us the 3 that are gone?
Yeah, red 3, citrus, red number 2, and orange B. So red 3 is the only one that's commonly used.
Yeah.
It's in a lot of candies, like the brightly colored, lollipops and things like that. So, but the others, the red 40, the yellow 5 are still the ones that are controversial. And those are the ones that Kraft and all of them are saying they're going to remove voluntarily.
Okay.
So
That's good.
that's pretty
Macaroni and
phenomenal.
cheese will not be as bright.
So-
Yeah, it's-
right.
it won't
Right.
be
Get
beyond
ready for
anymore.
your burnt orange brown shake. I'm gonna do a noodle near you.
And a quick question. I'm so curious as to obviously there's different versions of some of these products in different countries in Europe and Canada and US. And outside of the actual regulation of the products and maybe the sourcing of the products that you mentioned to change an ingredient, is it overall just cheaper to use some of these non-natural versions, or is that insignificant? Is it more expensive for them to produce products in Europe instead of the US, for example? Do you know?
That may be situation specific. Conventional wisdom, though, is that the synthetics are cheaper.
Yeah.
Ironically, they're more sterile, potentially, because they've been cooked up in a lab
Right.
and, and a manufacturing floor.
Right.
The natural ones present unique challenges because if you think about like a plant-based color, it's being grown worldwide. So the color variation from the geographic location where it's being made, or where it's being grown, could vary. You could have like raspberry juice as a color, but seasonally the color could change.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So
Okay,
companies are going to
right.
have to deal with that. But then the big thing is that where companies will have to change how they handle food safety in the manufacturing sphere is things like heavy metals in the soils that could end up in the color and also pesticides,
Pesticides.
which are
I was
kind of
gonna
the
say,
two
yeah.
Okay.
So they'll have to implement procedures to test for those
Mm-hmm.
so that they can be sure that the color itself isn't contaminated in any way.
Who does that?
Yeah.
You guys? Do you oversee that, or is that the FDA?
We don't do anything along that line, but every manufacturing facility has what's called a food safety plan, where they identify those types of hazards and then will have testing procedures in the factory. And they're required by law to have these food safety plans too, to
Right.
test for pesticides, to test for heavy metals, when they may be present. California, of course, you've got Prop 65. So, they're going to have to make sure that you don't have the lead and the cadmium and all of that. That would trigger the Prop 65 warning. So
Yeah.
then you all are even doubly protected because you have Prop 65.
Yeah. So, listeners, if you're not familiar, that is the legislation in the state of California that you can't have, if you have a cancer-causing chemical, you have to actually notify. You have to make, right? Am I saying that right? It has to be
Yeah, it has to be
shown
able.
to the consumer, right? I remember Starbucks. I don't see it anymore, but years ago, you would go in there and they would have a big sign. The roasting of the beans creates acrylamide. I think I'm saying that right. Yeah, which is a carcinogen. And so they would post these little signs over by like the sugar and stirs and poof, they disappeared. So I don't know. I don't know what happened there. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with every bag of coffee in California has to have the Prop 65 warning. I'm not sure. I know there were some changes to the level that had to be present to trigger that warning.
Oh,
I'm not sure whether or not there are any changes to it, though, because we don't deal directly with Prop 65. It's just kind of something that's interesting from a regulatory standpoint. As regulatory nerds, try and follow all of that kind of stuff. Because California kind of leads the way in a
right,
lot of
right.
cases with all of this. Like the Red 3 ban. California kicked that in first. California does
That's
come up
right. The school lunches, they banned it. Yeah. And California, yeah, you're right about leading the way, but also doesn't it help the whole country because manufacturers typically, if they're going to make something for California, they're going to just make it across the board versus having two different versions. Is that right?
Yes, 100%. And that's also why I'm cautiously optimistic that this whole trend that we're seeing is not going to be a blip, that it may be a permanent shift because we're seeing individual states implementing similar bans. So last count, there was maybe 15 or 20, 15 maybe, that had either bans in place or had pending legislation for them, either in
Oh,
school lunches or in the general supply. So like West Virginia has a ban for school lunch programs. They can't have foods that have these synthetic colors. And I think it's 2028, they will have like a ban for the entire food supply in West Virginia.
oh, we're
Wow.
moving to West Virginia. Pack up, get your
Go
bags
West
ready.
Virginia. Yeah. So,
You're not far yet.
yeah. So, yeah, Virginia, I think we've got a ban coming up for the school lunch programs.
Okay.
But so Texas this summer passed a labeling law where you have to have a warning that the product contains a chemical that has been deemed not appropriate for human consumption by the EU, UK, Canada, or Australia.
Oh,
And they
wow.
listed like 40 chemicals, including all these synthetic colors
Oh,
and some
wow.
other controversial ingredients. And I think starting the end of this summer, maybe, you have to put a warning label on
Wow.
your box of Fruit Loops if it's got any of these colors or any of
Wow.
Wow.
these
State of
ingredients.
Texas. That's interesting.
Texas.
Yeah. So that's a lot of changes going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think companies are seeing the writing on the wall,
Yeah.
and are like, it is, to your point, Lisa, like it is too difficult to try and get our supply and distribution chains to the point where we can be confident that we won't accidentally send something to Texas that can't be there,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
send something to West Virginia that can't be there. And so they may just be deciding that reformulation as a whole is just easier in the long run.
Yeah. Across
You know?
the board. So interesting, isn't it? It's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Wild to watch, I'm sitting on popcorn, like in the movie.
Right.
Like,
Right.
watching all this unfold is fascinating.
It's fascinating. Now you handle the colors in cosmetics as well, or kind of all the labeling?
Yeah, so FDA has, regulations on the books for which colors can be in food or cosmetics or supplements, drugs, medical devices, not so much because they don't tend to stay in constant contact with the body. But for the other categories, we research the ingredients for all of those categories as well.
But this ban is only for food, right? So we're still going to see these colors in cosmetics, I'm sure.
Yeah. So the red dye 3 has a ban for drugs as well as food. The other two, the citrus red and the orange bee, aren't used in any other food category or any other category at all.
Okay.
And then as far as like the voluntary phase out for those other synthetics like Red 40, I think they're earmarked mostly for food right now. I don't know that they're as worried about the cosmetic, but certainly ingestion.
I think a lipstick because, yeah, you've got all that red lake, which I believe, you could correct me if I'm wrong, is when they add aluminum to the red to make it stick to the product. And that's in a lot of lipsticks. And when you think how much lipstick you ingest, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, because at the end of the day, you're like, where'd my lipstick go? Well, it's on
Yeah.
you.
I know mine's gone in like 2 seconds. I never
Mine
wear
too.
lipstick because it's just gone. It's pointless to put it on. So yeah, so what happens with the lipsticks and similar types of products is if Red 40, for example, is water soluble. And so for a product like lipstick, where they want it to not be water soluble, they do this, additional step to put it on what they call a substratum. So like aluminum or barium or something like that, so that's no longer water soluble and it'll stay on our lips. And
Isn't
even
that
as
crazy? The things we do for beauty. But I use all natural, so I'm not using that.
well, that is
I've
why.
got some great brands.
You are such a natural
Listeners,
beauty.
I'll put some links in the show notes to some of my favorite brands. But you were talking about the pesticides, like them having to test, right? If they're going to be sourcing natural colors, they could potentially get contaminated with metals and pesticides. Couldn't they legally have pesticides if they're not organic?
So I have a basic understanding for organic regulations because that's all under USDA. But if it's an organic product, then in theory, yes, the colors would need to be organic as well. And therefore, pesticides would not be, in theory, part of that whole, the growing process for those particular
Right.
colors. And they would most likely source from companies that have been certified, by an accredited USDA, recognized organic certifier. So organic cosmetics or organic foods should be sourcing from color suppliers that have that certification as well.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the other ones could be contaminated with pesticides. I mean, they already are, but a lot of the other ingredients. Yeah.
Wow.
They do test, there are the EPA sets levels of pesticides that are permitted for certain food products and things. So they test routinely, particularly on products being imported. If you have pesticides that exceed what the EPA and the FDA allow, they will refuse entry for the product. So we see a lot of companies, they come to us, and they say, FDA is holding my product in the Port of Long Beach and they've tested it and they found pesticides. And I was like, well, send it on back because
Oh,
you are not going to
okay.
be able to get it in. So they do test periodically as well.
Like a random. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, what ripple effects do you anticipate this trend will have on smaller manufacturers or private labels in terms of keeping up with clean label demands?
So, the real question that we've, certainly been touching on a lot, so far has been, is this just a blip or is this sort of a permanent shift? In my heart of hearts, hope this is a permanent shift. Also because a lot of our clients are small businesses. They don't have their own regulatory teams. They come to us for assistance. And for them, making the shift, if they need to shift over from the synthetics to the natural alternatives, is a larger commitment of resources than maybe it is for a craft. And if they haven't been, selling into the EU or other markets, they're starting from scratch. This is going to be kind of a big haul for them. They're going to have to be prepared to go through the reformulation process, fixing all their labeling and beginning their distribution. And a lot of them are probably understandably worried, like, is this going to stick? But
Wow.
I am cautiously optimistic that this is going to be a permanent shift, particularly because of all those state bans that we've been talking about.
Yeah. That sounds like it's going to get more. Yeah.
That's a big part of it. So I think small businesses just need to be prepared for that additional investment, again, which will be a bigger hurdle for them.
Do you suspect that a lot of these small businesses will also maybe plan even deeper ahead and go, okay, we're gonna remove out these other
That's what I was
colored?
thinking.
Yeah,
Even the natural artificial flavors. Do you see that on the horizon?
For that, I'm not entirely sure. I know like RFK Jr. and the FDA have been putting out plans to start evaluating chemicals that are in the food supply. They put a tool recently that they say they're going to use to try and evaluate which are the higher risk additives versus others so that they can prioritize those for review. We're going to see where all of this goes. Artificial flavor is such a broad term that can be used to cover so many different things that, it's hard to know whether or not they're going to have that next in their sights,
Yeah.
or small businesses need to be worried about starting to reformulate to remove the artificial colors or not. I think the overall trends are towards more natural. You have artificial flavors, generally they're at a minimum, they're going to be declared in the ingredients list. If it's a case where, like, I'm going to go down the nerd hole here, y'all forgive me. But like if you declare that flavor, like my strawberry mini wheats, or you declare that flavor in the product name or on the product packaging, then you are required to put naturally flavored or artificially flavored. And so
Okay, you are. Oh, if you
not
market the the flavor.
Yeah. Yeah, they call it the characterizing flavor. And so if you've got it up there, like your candy and with a big old pineapple on the front, if it's artificial or naturally flavored without real pineapple, then on it goes.
You have to disclose that. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. It's amazing because what year do you know when they started putting food labels? Because it's hard to believe, but there was a time when the food labels weren't required, the ingredients lists. Do you know when that happened? I'm quizzing you. This is a pop quiz. But I remember.
I'm going to get graded. Grade me on it, so Lisa. So, back in the horror days when they were, adding sawdust to flour and everything was,
Oh, wow.
adulterated, like the early 1900s, that was the first law. It was in 1906. And then in 1938 is when they passed kind of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that gave FDA the power and the authority to go ahead and require that labeling in general be truthful and not misleading. You couldn't be lying about what you're putting in your product.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And then the ingredient regulations all started to come around in like the 1950s, 60s and the 70s.
Was this after they found cocaine, I guess, in Coke, right?
And
Wasn't
Coke, yeah.
right?
And there was
Isn't
a
that
lot of
crazy?
weird stuff, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, there was not much in the way regulation prior to all of that.
Cigarettes. Have you seen the old posters of the doctors recommending this type of cigarette? They're
Yeah,
wild.
so that we would not gain weight in our pregnancies, right?
Oh,
Oh.
okay. Gotta
So
be
that you don't
slim.
gain weight.
Wow.
That's why they're called the Ultra Slims, that brand, right?
Oh,
I
is that the
guess.
reason why?
I don't know. I'm guessing.
Oh,
Right?
sounds good.
They glamorized it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So-
so crazy. Wow. Well, this is really fascinating. Now, does this food coloring legislation apply to dog food or just human consumption?
So with the revocation, which means, with Red 3, they're removing it completely. Like it's a was kaput. The interesting part with animal feed and pet food is that some of the regulations specifically mention, dog and cat food. There's just sort of a general understanding
Okay.
in for pet food that if it's approved for human consumption, then it's approved for animal feed or pet food. But just like with the human food, you have to declare it by its name. So if you don't want your pets to be consuming these synthetic color additives either, then just look at that ingredients list. Usually they're going to be at the tail end because they're used in very small amounts. Just take a quick look, see whether or not Red 40 is listed or any of them. And that way you can avoid having your pets consuming it as well.
Right. I think that's so important. Pet health they get the same illnesses as humans, right? It's wild, like cancer and all of this. Well, you are what you eat. So
Right.
it's hard too. I think it's important to spend that extra money to get good quality food, not just for yourself, but for your pet. What's been the most shocking thing that you've come across in your work doing this? Anything that's kind of
I've got some stories.
Share.
insiders? You got to write a book.
Pick a category, Lisa.
I want the tell all.
Some of the dietary supplements are wild, and some of them have some very interesting ingredients. The craziest one I think I ever saw was one that had ground up cockroaches as
Oh,
the
right.
Oh, wow.
yeah,
There's a
like
name
on
for
purpose.
that, right? Is it carmine, which is the color red, or is that
No, it's not from cockroaches. Carmine is, I'm trying to think the name of the insect. It is, though, these beautiful red insects. And so those little guys get ground up and is definitely not vegan.
Right.
But gives a
how'd you know
great
we're
red
vegan?
color.
We are vegan.
No. Yeah, this was a
Yeah.
dietary supplement where the cockroaches were there on purpose. But it's
Really?
all,
Oh my God. That's crazy.
Yeah, there's also a fungus called cordyceps that is kind of comes out of a lot of like the Chinese herbal medicine kind of tradition.
Yeah, that's a mushroom, right? Cordyceps is a mushroom?
Yeah, it's a fungus. It's basically what mushroom is, but it infests like ants and it takes over their brains. And I
Whoa.
kid you not, it's like a zombie fungus that takes them over their brains and directs the ants, I think, to like higher ground to where it's sunny. And it's sort of gruesome.
Right.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not going to gross out your listeners anymore. With
Oh,
any-
you know what?
No, that's good.
People love this stuff. It's so much. Because I've eaten those kind of mushrooms. I've had them in supplements. Are you saying all of it is potentially to have that?
Cordyceps specifically.
Cordyceps. Yeah, I've had
This
cordyceps and
special
it's-
fungus. Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
The-
I saw a video on that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because
Yeah.
the
We
ants
just did. We're
basically
doing a
turn
parasite
into
cleanse right now. We're all into this. Like, there's that particular parasite that goes into a praying mantis. Have you ever seen it? It's a horsehair worm, I think. and it's really long and it goes into the praying mantis and it takes over the entire praying mantis. It like becomes the praying mantis. It's so, you guys Google
That's
this. Go on
that's
to
the
YouTube.
cordyceps.
Right.
That's
These poor
cordyceps.
little-
Yeah.
Yeah, due to these poor little ants. Yeah, just
Oh my. Okay. This is crazy.
hardwiring them.
There's so many weird things. So we have two doctor friends of ours, and she had come out with a nutrition bar and a vegan, like protein bar. And she was saying the labeling is really lack on the supplements, right? That she was kind of surprised with a lot of the like expiration dates are kind of, I don't want to say made up, but she was kind of alluding to that. Have you heard that? And also, like you're hearing about Amazon. Now you're hearing all the time on social media, these companies will rip off another supplement company and make it look like they're the legitimate company, but they'll use really cheap, junky ingredients. And that's why the price is like half. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. One of the
Okay.
phrases ever. The challenge that certainly FDA faces and we as consumers face is that with a few exceptions of some drug products, labels don't get approved by FDA. So supplements, foods, over-the-counter drugs, most of our medical devices as well, don't go through any sort of label approval process.
Oh my goodness.
And
Wow.
so nobody's coming behind to check, to make sure. You'll see every now and then, headlines about FDA finding that people are, lacing their supplements with illegal drugs or things like that.
Yeah.
They
Right.
try, but it's such a huge marketplace. And relatively speaking, they don't have the manpower necessarily to do it. And they don't have the power to force companies to get labels approved ahead of time or something like that.
Oh
So,
my gosh. That's pretty eye opening. So, really, supplements is that area that is
think
vulnerable.
supplements are, we see a fair amount of kind of eyebrow raising claims on some of our clients' products. Like, does it really do this?
Right.
Because those are not pre-cleared.
Right.
So you're supposed to have data, but until FDA comes and asks you for it, you can sort of put what you want
Whatever
on
you want on there.
label.
Oh, so it really comes down to brand reputation. And then this doctor friend had said the certificate of analysis, if you look for that on supplements, that's actually a really good thing.
Yeah, if they post it, like they have a website where they post that to prove that it's testing, the amount of ginseng or magnesium or whatever to prove that you're actually getting what you're paying for. That's great, because otherwise, we don't really know.
We don't really know. That's so interesting. Wow. Fascinating. Well, any last tips or advice for our listeners to avoid cockroaches in their
Yeah. If you don't recognize the name of it, don't buy it. Yeah. Google it first. Google it. So my takeaway and what I would say to your listeners is, for those of us that are interested in natural alternatives and everything, the power of the purse, put your money towards those brands that are making the move to the natural alternatives, trying to help us get additives out of, the ultra processed food, that just is like our food supply. Companies will respond if the sales stay where they are or go up. So
Yeah. We have the purchasing power, you guys listening. We have the power to demand. These brands will listen. Nowadays, you can just reach out on Instagram to these brands. I have to a couple brands asking, like, hey, your iced tea didn't say it's filtered. Is it? And then they sent me a huge long thing back about their filtration process. And it was like, before the internet, you couldn't do that. You'd have to write a letter and it'd be mailed and no one probably got back to you. So we do have that closer connection now with these brands where we can,
yeah. And if I could throw out one other thing too, with the Texas labeling law that I was talking about earlier, another part of that law that I was really excited to see was that it also directed the state to put more money to nutrition education in the schools, which I just think is so important. I mean, we've been talking about how wholesome foods, natural, organic, less processed is just so important to a healthy diet and addressing, the chronic disease that, has really kind of taken over, big portions of our population. And so pushing lawmakers to have the schools, teach kids at an earlier age, the value of nutrition and safe, wholesome, healthy, natural foods, I think is really pivotal, to turn
yes.
around some of the chronic disease situation in the U.S. So
That's
That's me
well
on my
said.
soapbox,
That's
and
so
I know
awesome.
people
No,
will do it.
it's true because, even Rod and I deal with the chemicals in the home. That's our alley that we are in. And it's really mind-boggling a lot. I mean, how many people go, well, it's on the shelf. It must be safe. There can't be anything toxic in that. And then you're like, no, there is. There's cancer-causing chemicals allowed in a lot of these things that you're ingesting and putting on your skin and sleeping on. And you do have to become an informed consumer today. And like you said, learning how to read the labels or ask the questions and really understanding where our food comes from. Because, I know growing up, Ron and I always laugh, like we grew up in the Twinkie generation,
Oh, yeah.
all these processed desserts. And never in a million years did you think some of this wasn't safe because your parents fed it to you and all your friends ate it. So you just assumed it's fine. Well, I guess heard Twinkies don't like break down over like,
Yeah.
is
Some of
that
the
true?
Twinkies in your mom's cabinet are probably still around.
Yeah.
Look
Wow.
exactly the
Perfect.
same.
Right. So yeah, education, guys. To take the time, spend the more money when you can. I know you're probably familiar with Environmental Working Group and their Dirty Dozen and their Clean 15 produce list that they come out with every year. And it's such a great tool because everyone's on a budget. Who's not? Everyone's on a budget. You can put the money into the foods that the produce that's highest in pesticides, buy those organic, and then the ones that are lowest in pesticides, you can buy conventional. And there's a really good money saving tip. So
Absolutely.
that's my food tip. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Anna.
Yes.
And as always, friends, you can find the show notes at healthyhomehacks.com.
Yes, listeners, we appreciate you so much. And be sure, thank you, please review and rate our shows. 5 stars are always appreciated. It really helps us. Let us know what segments you like, what you want to see more of. We really appreciate the feedback. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast as well. And just consider this a friendly reminder. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Anna,
everyone.
thank you.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Anna.
day. Bye-bye.
This episode of the Healthy Home Hacks podcast has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more healthy living strategies and tactics to help you create the healthy home you've always dreamed of. And don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to bring you the best content. See you on the next episode.